Good morning, Rabbi.
Morning, Joe.
I wanted to ask you about culpability. If I recall correctly, you had a sign over your desk when you were a chaplain that said, what was the sign again?
Today's going to be a great day because you found someone to blame for the mistakes you made yesterday.
There you go. And I told my daughter that story. I left out the blame part because I was trying to be encouraging as opposed to evasive. But what is it about blame? What is our first reaction is always, yeah, not me. Oh, how do I get out of this?
And I think, that goes back to the beginning of time. And let's go back to the beginning of time, to the beginning of the scriptures with Adam and Eve in the garden. So if I ask you, why was it that they got thrown out of the garden? What did they do that God banished them from the Garden of Eden?
They ate fruit when it wasn't on sale.
Exactly what people think. So I was reading the commentary for this week's Torah portion, which is the beginning of the Torah, the beginning of scriptures. And the rabbi pointed out something kind of novel, interesting, hadn't read before. He said that God said to Adam and Eve, don't eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so, as we know, they partake of the fruit. Well, the commentator said, it's God. God would have said, as any good teacher would say to the students, you didn't listen to me. I told you not to go out and eat from that particular tree. So what we're going to do is we're going to do wipe your memory so that we don't have to worry about you learning anything. And except I'm going to have you remember the incident so you don't do it again. As any good teacher would, I'm going to correct your mistake. So the commentator said God would correct it. That's not why he banished them from the garden. They violated what God considers a basic human principle, one of responsibility. So God says to Adam, did you eat from the tree? What did you do? And at that moment, God was hoping Adam would say, yeah, I did it. I was speeding. I ran the stop sign. I did it. But instead, he points a finger and said, that woman that you made for me, the woman you gave me? Well, she is responsible. She made me eat the fruit. So God, exasperated, goes to Eve and says to Eve, what happened? And Eve said, it was that snake. That snake over there was talking to me and telling me these things. And hey, it's not my fault. You want to blame somebody, blame the snake. So God approaches the snake and says, what did you do? And the snake looks all around and realizes there's nowhere to pass the buck. He's been blamed for something. And the snake responds with, I didn't tie them up. I didn't force the fruit down their throats. I was just talking to them. And so God has his moment and realizes that if we're going to have human beings, people have to be responsible and understand that they're responsible, rather than spending the whole time looking for a way to either blame someone else or not have responsibility. And this has become an epidemic. Never mind COVID. We have an epidemic of irresponsibility. The TV, everything has a disclaimer. Nobody wants to be responsible. It's not my fault if you have an allergy. It's not my fault if this, and at the bottom of the screen, in little white type, that the only reason I know is I freeze the screen to read it. Otherwise, you can't read the disclaimers. That I'm watching a car commercial, and it said, this vehicle is a prototype. What's a prototype, Joe?
You can't buy it. You can't
buy it. That's correct. So we're watching a prototype in a car commercial. But don't blame me, because we wrote at the bottom of the screen in little tiny white type against a white background that it was a prototype. The fact that you couldn't read it, well, hey, it's a snake's fault. And continuously, everyone, well, I have to consult with my attorney. I'm going to say alleged. I love watching the news. They show an incident. You're watching it unfold. Allegedly, the building's on fire. The building's burning down. Allegedly, there's someone lying in the street and they have a video of the car running. Allegedly, and again, it doesn't help. God laid it down in the garden. If you were speeding and the officer says, I clocked you, you were speeding. You're right, officer. I was speeding. Rather than, well, I was changing the station. Oh, I had a text message, or I had to finish my coffee, or, oh, I just had a fight with my wife and I'm so upset and I don't know what I'm doing. No, I think we could go correct a lot of what's going on by taking responsibility for our actions, for our thoughts, and not spending so much time doing what we used to call CYA. And that's finding a way so if something went wrong, I wouldn't be responsible. The reality is, Adam ate the apple. He didn't have to listen to Eve. Eve didn't have to listen to the snake. They didn't. There was no coercion involved. And so that's why God banished them from the garden. He said, you know, this isn't going to work. This isn't going to work because as your father, the basic lesson I want to teach you is to be responsible. Then you'll be more careful in making decisions. If I know I'm going to be responsible for something, then I'm going to be a little more circumspect than if I've figured out a way to blame someone else or to cover my tracks. So, hey, what the heck? Hey, if this goes wrong, my lawyers will cover and I'll be able to still make my millions of dollars by promoting a drug that didn't work or selling a vehicle that has intrinsic faults in it. I won't be culpable. I won't be responsible. So, hey, that's perfectly fine. And I think a lot of our problems in our society and with politicians, show me where a politician has to bear the brunt of their own decisions.
Well, maybe it comes down to people do the wrong thing, knowing they're doing the wrong thing, but they think they're not going to get caught. And so they're as surprised as anyone else that when it happens.
Right. And it may not be so much the wrong thing as something irresponsible, something you wouldn't do if you knew that you were going to be held accountable. And again, I go back to all our politicians. Doesn't matter which political party. Show me where, other than voting, and usually they get reelected, reappointed to whatever committee they're on, they're not on the same health plan you and I are on. They're not on the same retirement plan we're on. They're making all kinds of decisions about us that doesn't affect them. And I think we'll go a long way if they had to go on our medical plan, if they had to go on our drug plan, and if they had to commute. I think things would change dramatically because they would be responsible for the decisions they're making. And I think they wouldn't be so quick to spend money.
So instead of saying, don't do the crime if you can't do the time, you're saying, don't do the crime unless you're prepared to admit you did it.
Exactly. And we use Adam and Eve as what happened. They were banished from an idyllic life in the Garden of Eden, where everything would have been perfect and fine, except they wouldn't accept responsibility for something that they did. And God said, that's not acceptable behavior. Not acceptable.
Well, I know one thing that isn't acceptable to me, the thought that I can't keep having great conversations with you every week. Thank you so much for the wisdom, Rabbi, and we'll look forward to the next time.
And you're very welcome. Just keep in mind, Joe, for every cartoon you draw, I'm holding you responsible for what you're putting in pen and ink.